Welcome Warlords to Saga Thursday. I'm your host Rodge, as always, here for your weekly Saga fix. Today's the third video in a series of videos designed for your Saga First Edition pros, getting you guys up to speed for the second edition. Originally I tried to do it in one video, but about 40 minutes later on the subject of the underlying troops and army composition and the orders phase went about 40 minutes. So this one, we're going to cover the movement, shooting, and melee. We're going to bang them all out. And once again, these are designed for people who are familiar with the first edition. If you are newbies, you're going to want to look elsewhere. I will be having some How to Play Saga second edition videos come out probably in the next month or two. But otherwise, you can try to follow along if you want. Maybe there will be some value here for you. But okay, first of all, movement. So the big thing here is straight lines. Everybody's got to move in a straight line. That luxurious Saga stick is your guide. No kinks in that thing unless you bend it. So you're going straight with everybody. And the key is the individual models. So the units can have guys kind of go like this, this, and this. It's not like the unit has to go zoop or zoop or zoop. So it's a little more complicated than it might seem. One thing is cavalry can actually do a little jank in their turn. They can do two mediums instead of a long if they want. So they can do a little turn, but they have to move the full medium in order to do that. So they can't go 2 inches and then shoot. They have to go 6 inches, then they can go shoot. So yeah, the restrictions that were dropped, so to kind of balance this out, are that you no longer have to stay out of very short if you're not going to engage, or that short on the second activation, which could always kind of catch people out, was kind of complicated. So those are gone. Similarly, if you start within very short, you no longer need to charge or engage that melee that unit. So it's kind of interesting. You can just go on, get out of there. Now, in addition to that straight line thing, there is kind of a grouping cohesion type rule that is surprisingly complicated and spans a few pages, but the gist of it is if you're infantry, everybody has to be within a kind of 8-inch bubble, and if you're cavalry, it has to be within a 12-inch bubble. So in this edition, everybody can fight, so that kind of just prevents long, stringy units, potentially, which having some of you guys out of combat was a disadvantage in the first edition, which is eliminated in the second edition. So yeah, you gotta kind of bubble them up. It's a little more complicated than that. You can look in the rules for the nice diagrams and stuff. There is kind of a corner case I will mention when we get to charges, but first I want to talk about the maneuver, which is a free activation if you start more than 12 inches, more than a long away from the enemy, which is pretty awesome. Great for getting units up to speed. There's a couple restrictions here. You cannot move within long with that free movement, so you have to basically just stop just outside of 12 inches if you want to get this free activation. Another restriction, it actually has to be in the open, so you can't, if there's a woods on your flank or something, you think you might be able to use this maneuver to get the free activations to slog through. Not going to happen. One thing is it has to be the first activation of the turn for that unit, which contradicts with the rest of activation ability, which also has to be the first activation of your turn. So basically you can do a free movement potentially with maneuver, or you can do a rest. You won't be able to do both with the same unit on the same turn. So yeah, maneuver though, like it. You can get, it's nice getting your whole army up there for free. Surprising mobility in this edition. Okay, now charges are split out from movement. Those are two separate activations, and there's a couple underlying rules differences there, but mainly this is, I think the main purpose is you can differentiate between movement and charges on Saga abilities. So you used to have Saga abilities that would let you do a movement, but it'd have to say you couldn't engage. So now they can just say movement or charge and kind of set the tone with what they had in mind with the ability there. There is a difference with cavalry where they can't do the little whoop little jank in their charge. They can only go the full 12 inches in a straight line. And then another difference with the charge is if for whatever reason you can't actually get into base contact with the enemy, either through your movements reduced or something like that, or another SAGA ability, then you don't actually move at all, and the entire activation is canceled. It doesn't even count as an activation. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Where previously you'd try to engage, they would shut you down, say no, you're going short, and then you would end up, just moving 4 inches instead of 6 inches, and you could actually kind of move in a completely different direction. For the charging, it's in straight lines. You just got to try to hit an enemy model if you can. There's no this two guys double up on one and then they move on. Try to touch if you can. If you can't, then you just move in as close as you can. So there is a grouping rule with Cohesion, where I was talking about before, where the infantry got to stay within 8 inches of each other. There is kind of a corner case here with the charges, where it's possible if you're kind of spread out, you might have a situation where some guys on the end can actually move into base within a medium, but the guys behind won't be able to follow up quick enough to meet certain guidelines. And I'm not really going to get into this, kind of hard to explain. One thing, you take a look at the SAGA rulebook. It's probably not going to come up that much. All you need to do is just make sure you bunch up your guys nice and tight, and it'll never happen. But in my Vikings versus Anglo-Danes battle report, basically the first SAGA 2nd edition battle report that I did, this actually happened kind of early on in the game. So take a look at that if you haven't seen it yet. You'll be able to see with the models on the board and kind of see a really good explanation of that situation that can crop up. So one last thing, I want to talk about fatigue for movement. So one is you can use a fatigue just like before to take a unit down to short, but now it's just short for everybody. So I think cavalry went from long to medium. Now they go from long to short, so that's a pretty big difference. One thing is it's not cumulative with terrain. So before you could reduce somebody's move down to a very short if they were already in the woods. None of that's going on here. If you do that, basically you're kind of just wasting that fatigue, because short is the shortest that they can go. And then one biggie here, which I don't think has come up, and this might not be the spot, but it seems like the spot, is you can use 2 fatigues to cancel a unit's activation outright, which is pretty amazing, but it does shut 2 fatigues off. But it's nice having that in your back pocket. It has come up like once or twice in the games that I have played. And something to keep in mind. Shedding those 2 fatigues is a pretty big deal. You'd rather have those on there, but sometimes you do not want that unit engaging or moving away or doing whatever the hell it's going to do to you. So yeah, that's a kind of a nice ability there. So that is a summary of the movement. I'm going to lubricate here, and then we'll get into shooting. Shooting is very similar to the way that it was. A couple changes off the bat. There's an 8 dice cap for your initial combat pool, which can actually, with SAGA abilities, it can still get up to 16. But basically, we mentioned, with the Hearth Guard, they're going to not be able to max out their attacks if you take big units of them. The SAGA abilities, when you choose to play them, and this includes fatigue, which is at a kind of falls into those steps now, is they're back and forth. Instead of all attacker and then all defender, attacker picks one ability, or to use fatigue, which for shooting, that's the same as before. The attacker can't use the defender's fatigue, but the attacker goes, then the defender goes, the attacker, they kind of do one tit for tat until both people are good. Shooting for bows, slings, javelins are pretty much the same ranges. Crossbows are different in the fact that they can't activate for multiple shots just immediately one after other. There has to be a different kind of activation in between there. So if you want to shoot, you can shoot. If you want to shoot again, you have to move or rest, basically just stay and put. You probably don't want to move, and then you can shoot again. So you might not be getting off a lot of shots with your crossbows in the new edition, unless you have some weird board stuff to take advantage of that. And composite bows are actually the same way. They're 6-inch range like they were before, a medium, but they get the shooting activations for free, which is pretty pretty awesome. But then to do the multiples, they have to have some other kind of activation in between the shooting activations. So if you can do a free shot if the enemy is within medium, and then if you want to do it again, you got to move, and then you can do another free shot. It's kind of interesting. I don't know what the significance is. It seems a little better than having the shots tied to a movement, perhaps, but I'm not totally sure why that particular rules change went through. I haven't played them yet. I got to get some Byzantine Hearth Guards with composite bows, or some Steppe Tribe guys. Basically, those are the only units that can rock them. Cover is slightly different. Well, the underlying cover rules are the same, but the unit has to be entirely within the cover in order to gain benefit. You have one guy out, no additional cover save, so very important to keeping your guys in. And then one extra bonus with shooting is if you wipe a unit out with shooting, it will generate a fatigue for everybody within short. So that's just a blanket rule, where previously you needed to wipe a unit on melee in order to generate that fatigue bubble of destruction, where now basically if somehow whatever you killed and whenever a unit's wiped out, doesn't matter if it's actually shooting, melee, or saga abilities or what, some other way, it's going to generate those fatigues. So that is it for shooting. We're moving along here. We're trucking, but we're getting to some real meat and potatoes now with the melee phase, which will take place after your charge. And one thing is the melee reaction abilities are completely gone, which I think I mentioned in the prior video. But there are plenty of activation abilities or activation reaction abilities that could provide bonus dice prior to the melee. The order of things is kind of different. So step 1 is actually called close ranks. I don't remember exactly. Fighting defensively might have been the term in the last one. But first thing you do before you even get your dice out, I don't know why they decided on this, but you're going to say, I'm going to close ranks. And this option is only open to certain troops. So if you look at the description for the various pieces of equipment, if you have a bow, a javelin, heavy weapon like a Dane axe, if you're mounted, you cannot close ranks. Basically, if you're just a regular trooper, you can close ranks. Every other kind of equipment option, you are unable to close ranks, which is kind of cool. It gives a little bonus for just your regular run-of-the-mill guys. And yeah, what it does, though, is differently than before. You're still going to get rid of half of your attacks, but you're going to block on 4s instead of 5s. So it's kind of, basically you count as defending in hard cover. And if you're already defending in hard cover, then there's no additional bonus. So it's kind of wasted. Don't do that. Do not do that. So it's kind of different than before. So before you get defense dice, some situations will be worse, some it'll be better. Basically, before, you got more benefit for fighting defensively if you had a crap load of attacks. The more attacks you sacrifice, the more defense dice you get. Here, the bigger benefit is if the enemy has a bucket load of attacks, because more wounds are going to go through, so you're going to be rolling more defense or defense dice in general, and having more 4s pop up in there will be better versus saying you have 2 guys fight defensive, 2 warriors. You're going to lose 1 attack, but you can block like 20 attacks hitting on 4s if you just roll a crap load of 4s, versus in the prior edition, 2 guys, you drop 1 attack, you get 1 defense dice. So it's only going to help you against like 1 extra wound. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Obviously, if you can get defense dice through saga abilities, which is the only way to get additional defense dice, you can really stack things up pretty nicely. There are some abilities on the boards. I've seen at least one where you can improve that block down to a 3 or better, maybe even a 2. I don't know, it's kind of scary. But it does seem like they're throwing out more defense dice on these boards than they were in the prior edition. So yeah, just something that I've noticed. Okay, so when we get to the combat pool, one thing is you're going to add up your dice, and then maybe this is how it was before, but it's specifically clarified in here. But if you do get bonus attacks from like activation abilities or activation reaction or something like that, or just a general board-wide a bonus that you played, those do get added to your initial pool. So if you had 8 warriors, you'd have 8 attacks. Let's say you had an ability that let you charge and get 4 extra attacks, so that'd be 12. And then your cap then would be 24, not that 8. So that's clarified. Maybe some abilities might have worked like that in the first one, but that's specifically noted here. The cap at the beginning is 16. So we had an 8 dice shooting cap. It's going to be 16 here, and then that'll naturally double to 32 for after all the Saga abilities are played. So yeah, you put your, say if you're going to close ranks, get your dice out. After you add everything up, you then if you do close ranks, you're going to discard half of those. Then you're going to get to the Saga ability phase. So just like shooting, it's going to alternate between players using one ability at a time. The attacker goes first, and then the defender can go. And then one thing is that fatigue is used in one little pips in these steps. So, I'm going to say if you have 3 fatigue on them, you can't use them all at once. You can only use it one at a time. Then you give the opponent a chance to do something. You can come back and use it again. So that can make a big difference on some of these abilities where you shed fatigue. So your opponent might get to use it quick if they're attacking you, get rid of it first. But you can still pop that ability and get rid of like the other fatigue that you have. So yeah, kind of interesting. One big change is fatigue can be used in multiple steps up and down. So you could use all 3 fatigues if somebody had them to take their armor all the way down to a 2+. So Hearthguard, if they're exhausted, they got 3 fatigue, they go from 5s down to 2s, which is completely massive in my opinion. So yeah, it's kind of something crazy to wrap your head around. And similarly, you could jack your own armor up. You could take levies all the way up to 6s for whatever reason if the other guy was completely exhausted. So I did mention exhaustion. That does apply. That previously you would discard half your attack dice kind of at the beginning step before anything happened. Now you just get a -1 to your attack roll in the ensuing melee. And if you're exhausted at the start, it's going to carry forward through the entire combat. It's not going to, that penalty is not going to go away if they spend your fatigue later, which they're definitely going to want to do. So it's basically established at the beginning, and then if they spend it later, too bad. You're still suffering the penalty. So what can happen then is you can use the fatigue to take your armor of someone down to 2, or take yourself up to 6. So those are capped. But because of someone being exhausted, if your armor is 6 and they're getting a -1 to hit on their dice rolls, so this is very specifically worded, they won't be able to hit you. So if somebody's exhausted, there's a chance you could go in, spend the fatigue on them, and you will not be able to be hit. So this, how prevalent that's going to be remains to be seen. Still just being hit on 6s isn't too bad, and generally you do want to use the fatigue to make them easier to hit, but something you could keep in mind. And then, so similarly, if you have a Dane Axe, that applies the same as it did before. It gives you a +1 to hit. So if the armor of somebody is 2, which crops up a heck of a lot more than it used to, which I'll explain, you will be auto-hitting them, because if the armor's 2, you can roll a 1. If you roll 1, +1 is still a 2. So you're going to be auto-hitting on all those Dane Axes. And then you will actually have that same opportunity with Javelins. So the difference with Javelins is they're kind of like the Franciscas from ATS and Arthur. If you remember those, they gave you +1 to your attack dice on the charge, and Javelins will do the same here. In this new edition, you're throwing on the way in. It's kind of cool. There is an armor penalty for Javelin, so it'll reduce your armor by 1 in melee, regardless, all the time. And a lot of the weapons have that. Basically all the bows, crossbows have the same stipulations. Those ones are against shooting and melee. The composite bows take you down in melee, but can only be used by mounted troops, so they're already 1 pip down because they're mounted against shooting. So yeah, those are the kind of the equipment options. Work out pretty much the same, but this is kind of cool with the Javelins because that's kind of a blanket thing that wasn't universally applied in the prior books. It was kind of hit or miss. So like the Welsh, they all had Javelins, but their melee and combat was still the same, which was kind of interesting. I think they were worse against shooting because of the Javelins, or being more lightly armored. So that wasn't consistently applied in the prior edition, but now it is. So a lot of troops, a lot of boards, all their warriors are down to armor 3. And then if you have Javelin guys on Javelin guys, that's how you're going to be hitting on 2s. Just normal combat's going to be coming up. This new edition seems a lot bloodier, I do have to say. And then we got our dice. We're capped out. We're getting these +1 to hit. If you do have defense dice, one important difference is there's no cap out on those babies. So previously, it didn't really come up too much, but if you had a bucketload of defense dice, you were capped at like basically one per wound, one extra 1 per wound. So you could have twice as many defense dice as you are taking wounds. In this edition, there's no cap on that baby. So you can, I've had it happen where I'm rolling 4 defense dice against 1 wound that's coming in. So that's kind of cool, kind of interesting. Had to go through the rules kind of with a fine-tooth comb the first time because it didn't seem right. But yeah, there's no limitation on that, which makes sense. The only way to get defense dice again is through the Saga abilities. But for withdrawal, after all your hits, all your wounds, rolling defense dice, the only difference I could really see was if you were closed ranks or you were in hard cover, the attacker would automatically withdraw unless they outnumbered you. So if you're going in, ripping stuff up, doing a bunch of wounds to the enemy, if they still outnumber you and they close ranks or defended, you're still going to pop back. So it could be handy for controlling objectives or something like that. It's kind of cool. And then that kind of does play into, I think, the presence ability that we talked about in the first video, where the Warlord counts as 4 bros for that. So he's not always going to be bouncing back all the time. With 8 attacks, probably killing a bunch of guys. So it's probably not going to come up too much. This will be something that you're probably going to forget a lot and not really be reminded at any point. But something to keep in mind if you were playing this new edition here. So yeah, I think that's about it. I went through them all as quick as I could, everything I could think of relating to melee, shooting, movement. If there's anything that I missed, please let me know. But I think those are the main changes, and I think it's a good refresher for jumping in. And I think that's about it for this video. If I did miss anything or stated something incorrectly, please post below so people can see that. And I can respond to those if there's questions or something like that. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Hoping you guys are enjoying the new edition like I am. I'm having a blast. Got a good group of guys here. Looking forward to getting plenty of games in. So yeah, thanks for watching, subscribing, all that stuff. I'm going to catch you guys next week. We're going to have a battle report. Scots versus Danes. So check back for that. I'll see you guys then. Bye-bye.
Saga!